Sometimes I wish I had discovered Rocket League earlier, and I'm not talking about when Rocket League first came out in June of 2015, but rather years before that, when Rocket League wasn't even Rocket League, but it was actually this game called SARP, Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket-Powered Battle Cars. I remember the one time I got to meet and hang out with Jetro, and we talked for a long time about what the game was like then, and what the community was like, and also about things that we think Rocket League should do now, and this sort of inspired me to look further into this and into what the real differences were between Rocket League and this prequel to Rocket League, which was SARP, because I know virtually all of you have never played this game, you'll never get a chance to play it, or have any idea really what it was like back then. Now I have to give a huge shout out to my boy Linkuru for helping me out with this video. Linkuru is a SARP vet. That means that he played the prequel to Rocket League, and thus he's a veteran, I guess. Anyways, he gave me some really cool direction for each of these topics that we're talking about today. So if you guys haven't checked him out, he has a great YouTube channel, mostly like edited, just fun stuff. I'll put a link to his channel in the description below. Also, before we jump into the video, if you guys are looking to improve at Rocket League, I'm currently doing a sale, 30% off my Rocket League mechanics course. I would highly recommend this if you are around, say, diamond or lower, so like bronze to diamond in your ranks. If you're a GC, this probably isn't for you, but if you're looking to get into, say, champ or diamond or plat or whatever, give this a look. I'll put a link in the description below, and don't forget to use the code FLuuMP to get 30% off your purchase. All right, let's jump in. In general, the physics of SARP were not as different from Rocket League as it may appear at first. If you go watch clips, it looks so different, but perhaps the biggest difference was really the thing that made the overall feel so different, and that is the ball speed. And not just the ball speed, but also the way the ball bounced. As Linkuru puts it, it felt more like a rubber ball, apparently, compared to Rocket League's harder, sort of less bouncy ball. So if you watch clips from SARP, you start to see that players could shoot power shots on net from almost anywhere on the field if timed correctly, basically like boomer mode. And both Jetro and Linkuru have told me that this was one of the things that they loved about SARP over Rocket League, which is just like the overall pace and speed of the play, because the ball moved so much faster and was so much bouncier. And I remember Jetro especially saying that he actually wishes that Rocket League's ball speed was a bit faster today. But in general, the overall physics were pretty similar. Obviously, Rocket League's physics are more polished, and I guess you could say more realistic to an extent, but for the most part, the physics were basically the same. So one of the biggest differences between SARP and Rocket League, and this becomes apparent as you look at the game more closely, is that there are so many less options for players. And so for camera options and camera settings, there are no camera settings. So in SARP, besides ball cam being on toggle versus hold ball cam, you don't really have any options. You can't mess with your FOV or anything like that. So many of the SARP vets were used to actually using hold ball cam, and that's why Cooksier and Scrub, and I believe Kronovi, all started out with hold ball cam in Rocket League as like sort of the default. There's also a major difference in how ball cam actually worked in the game. In Rocket League, ball cam is always fixed on the ball no matter what, but in SARP, your camera would actually shift a bit when you turned, and this is one of the weirdest things about watching old SARP clips. This little difference in how the camera worked makes the game feel completely different. And in my opinion, this was one of the best shifts from the old game. It's difficult for players to get used to ball cam at first, because it means that, you have to be able to commit to muscle memory, the idea that, your car isn't facing the ball, and so everything is backwards in terms of controls. But I think the difference in camera mechanics really plays a huge part in making us think that SARP feels so different, and really why Rocket League feels so much smoother, because every time you turned, even in ball cam in SARP, it like moved the camera a little bit. I don't know, it just looks really weird. Like so many other aspects of SARP, it was really small differences that combined to make the game feel so different. So I'd say there's two things to consider when you're looking at the graphics and overall style of Rocket League versus SARP. First, the graphics in SARP are graphics from a PS3 game from literally years and years before Rocket League. Like this game came out, I believe, in 2008, and most games looked much worse then versus now. So, it's not totally fair to say that the graphics were worse per se, because all game graphics were worse, but they were worse, basically. And this leads us into the second point, which is that Rocket League is kind of less cartoony in terms of graphics. It's a sort of more realistic look, even though it's still maintaining kind of a cartoony look, just not to the extent that SARP did. So the Rocket League cars, I guess, feel more like real cars versus sort of like RC cars, which is how Linkuru described the overall look and feel of cars in SARP. Okay, so this brings us to the actual cars themselves. There's definitely crossover and inspiration between cars. There's way more cars in Rocket League, and obviously way more variations of cars as well. In Rocket League, you have different hitboxes, or at least you had complete different hitboxes for every single car. Now you have 5 different standardized hitboxes. And now I'm not sure the stats on cars for SARP, but when you look at the list of cars in the pictures, honestly, it kind of just looks like they're all the same car, like the same hitbox, just different designs. Like there's no flat cars really, like the Dominus or the Batmobile. And Linkuru informed me that the actual feel of the cars was a bit different as well. He said that the handling felt kind of stiffer, like the cars were sort of more glued to the ground, and that air rolling was notably faster. And also the second flip timer for SARP ran out much earlier, which is kind of interesting. So this aspect of how the cars actually worked brings us right into the topic of mechanics and what was actually possible in SARP versus Rocket League. So the basics of the game are the same in terms of mechanics. Freestyling, for example, was quite similar, especially to how freestylers looked in Rocket League's early days. Obviously, freestyling is more mechanical today. Nobody was hitting quad heli flip resets in SARP. Flicks weren't even really a thing. There was no keeping your flip if you dropped off the ceiling. That was something that was added with the Neo Tokyo update. And Linkuru told me that he actually experimented a while ago and found out that you can actually half flip in SARP, which was something he said that, to his knowledge, virtually nobody was doing besides a few individuals that told him afterwards. So the basics of the game were still the same, just many of the high-level mechanics like flip resets and stalling, these things either weren't possible or they weren't discovered yet. But the basics of like car dodging and boosting and flying and air control, all of that stuff was there in SARP. Think of SARP kind of like a gold player, and Rocket League is sort of like the Grand Champ version of that. The biggest difference between maps in SARP versus Rocket League is the whole concept of a standard map. SARP really didn't have this. All of the maps had a different shape and layout, although the map Urban, which had the general shape of, Rocket League standard maps, this was pretty much the most popular, but people like to play other maps as well. There was the classic SARP map that felt like a soccer stadium, and then obviously maps like, their Wasteland version with all of its wonderful slopes. And so the move to more standardized Rocket League maps happened in Rocket League. That is one standard map with sort of different aesthetics. And I think this happened for many reasons, but the fact that Rocket League jumped into esports pretty early is, I believe, a huge factor. Having the game feel consistent and basically, the same all the time, I think that was really important. But in general, the biggest push away from having different maps was really the player base. Like, people like standard maps. For the most part, at least most players do. More casual players maybe like the variety, but Rocket League became less and less casual as its player base grew and as it solidified itself as an actual esport. Now this brings us to one of the biggest differences between SARP and Rocket League, and that is the overall meta. Again, the fact that Rocket League jumped into esports is huge, but the overall meta is completely different. Like, SARP really wasn't about having the best or the most effective playstyle as a team in order to get wins. Many of the players who ended up pros in Rocket League's early days, players like Cooksier and Pashy and Kronovi, obviously they were competitive and they sort of looked at the game that way. But even talking with Jazer, he said some of his favorite car soccer memories were just being in a lobby in SARP with other high-level players and just laughing at all the ridiculous stuff that would happen. So this game really wasn't optimized to the level Rocket League was. It wasn't really meant to be played in that hardcore competitive environment, and so most players just pretty much had fun with the game. And one of the biggest differences, though, in what it actually took to win games was this element of power shots. If you watch any SARP montage, because the game pretty much looks like a slowed down version of boomer mode, power shots were everything. And if you were good at timing that, you could score tons of goals. All right, let's talk about customization. Now, there's not much to talk about, honestly. SARP had virtually no customization, besides being able to choose between 3 different decal options for each car. So you'd basically just choose your car, choose a decal before each match, and this is really a lot like other car-based games from this era. Now, Linkuru actually sent me a video where he was experimenting with the idea of customization in SARP, and this video came out in September of 2012. And it's crazy, just how on point he was with what Rocket League would ultimately go for. Now, this is kind of crazy to think because customization is literally half the game in Rocket League. There's a huge group of people who this is all they care about. There's endless possibilities between countless decals and wheels and colored items, and even the amount of cars that you can use in the game now. It's just so weird to think that there really wasn't any of that in SARP. Alright, game modes. So in SARP, there was unranked 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4v4, and then there were 2 single player modes, which were tournaments and minigames. So the tournaments weren't actually tournaments per se, just basically more matches where you would unlock more difficult bots after each game, and you just keep playing bots. And the minigames actually had challenges, timed events, like mutators, things like cue ball or slow-mo, or like wind that would push the ball away from the goal. There was a ranked mode that ultimately ended up shutting down. Apparently it was just a basic elo system with no skill-based matchmaking, and you'd see a list of anonymous players and you'd pick one and just pray that it wasn't someone really good. There was something in SARP that lots of Rocket League players have called for, and it's actually a team mode. That was kind of like clubs are in Rocket League, but you know, it was better in a lot of ways. So you could actually invite friends to your club, but you were also able to play ranked matches against other teams and other clubs, and it had its own leaderboard. So in terms of game modes, there were actually quite a few unique options in SARP. Alright, last but not least, let's talk about the community. So according to both Jetro and Linkuru and everyone else who I've talked to, the SARP community was really small, but very close and very passionate about the game. People used all of the different like forums to share posts or talk about, you know, things in the game, and people would use, you know, like the PS3 text chats to interact with each other because, you know, a lot of people didn't use voice chat. I'm assuming it just kind of stunk the way that voice chat stinks today. But really the community was something that we've never seen in Rocket League because it blew up so quick. So I would say the closest thing to this is like the smaller communities within the larger community of the game. So I'm sure it felt really special back then because there were all these other massive games, from games like GTA to Call of Duty, and those who found themselves in this like amazing car soccer game with this small group of people. I don't know, I'm sure that like felt really special. In some ways we can relate to that with Rocket League, but at this point Rocket League is, you know, still pretty much a mainstream game. Anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this one. Let us know down below if you played SARP and if there's anything else that we could learn about what it was like playing back then, because I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Again, big shout out to Linkuru for helping me with this video and giving me so much information. And again, don't forget to check out the Rocket League Mechanics Master Course. Use code FLuuMP for 30% off, link in the description. And you know, stop sucking at Rocket League. All right, we'll see you next time. Peace out.